Hi everyone, welcome to the highlight show of Clash Chess International. My name is Tatev Abrahamyan and I'm going to take you to the key moments of day 3. So today, two of the players qualified to the semi-finals. Magnus Carlsen successfully defeated his opponent Jeffery Xiong, and Wesley So successfully defeated his opponent Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. So Magnus Carlsen will meet the winner of the match between Alexander Grischuk and Levan Aronian, and Wesley So will be meeting one of his countrymen, as he will be facing the winner of Fabiano Caruana and Lenier Dominguez match. So let's dive into the games and take a look at what happened today. Let's start with the match between Wesley So and Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. So Wesley entered the day with a 3-point lead over his opponent, but as he mentioned in a post-game interview that he felt that Maxime played a lot better this time around, and he definitely came ready to fight and try to even the score. So in this, let's jump to move 53. So we have these rook endgames, and we have seen a lot of rook endgames in this tournament. A lot of them are very instructive. So Maxime here decides to go rook a5, and we're going to see how this game ended in a draw, how he successfully, very easily makes a draw in this position. And the key is to keep checking and attacking the pawn and not to allow the pawn go to e2. So in this game, actually, Maxime was doing quite well, but did not manage to do anything with it and had to settle for a draw. And let's jump into our second game. So this game could have really gone in Wesley So's favor, as in this position he grabbed the pawn, so Maxime sacrificed the pawn, kind of went all out, but didn't really achieve match for it. So he plays a rook c2, Wesley that is, and he's met with rook c8, trading down into queen versus two rooks position, and we know that two rooks are supposed to be better than a queen, and if you look at this position, this knight is not doing amazing, as all these squares are covered, but at the same time this bishop is also blocked by its own pawns. But white is up a pawn, and here Wesley made a huge blunder playing g5, allowing this queen to come in and entering this position where now we see that the queen has a lot of activity, and the game ended in a draw as the position became quite complicated, and Wesley decided to settle for a draw, as he probably got scared of this passed pawns, and actually it's kind of hard for white to make any progress at this point. And so the games ended, the first two games ended in a draw, so the score is the same. Wesley's still up 3 points with 4 games to go. So this match actually finished very quickly. It finished before the Magnus match was even halfway through. They did start an hour earlier, but the games were very fast-paced. As we can see, this game ended with Wesley 6 minutes on his clock and with Maxime 5 minutes on his clock. So let's move on to our third game. And this could have been the turning point in the match, as Maxime scores his first victory of the day, narrowing the gap between the two players. So in this position, again, another rook endgame, and we actually see why rook endgames are notoriously so difficult, and why you have to play them out. And even if you think if you're on the winning side, or if you're pressing and you feel like you're entering the draw territory, you should still play it out, because there's always so many chances. Okay, so king f5 was played correctly, leaving this pawn, going for this after this g7 pawn. So rook goes back, and taking the pawn, which was a blunder, because after check, now king has to go the other way, because king e6 loses to f5, check, trading the rooks, and now we're seeing that this pawn is just too fast, and now white gets another tempo in by checking the king, and this pawn is just queening, so this completely hopeless king and pawn endgame. So instead, after king d5, check, the rook goes to c4, so f5, fixing the pawn structure, f4. So now the rook is stuck on the 7th rank, defending this pawn. So black really doesn't have any choice but to go back and forth. So he decides to give up this pawn, hoping to get this f-pawns, because king g6 runs into check, and you cannot do something like this because it ends in a draw. So king g6 was played, But of course he goes back, rook f7, and now he finds the brilliant move f6. And here Wesley actually resigned because this pawn is going to get lost. Because if you take with the pawn, it's a double attack. Now the rook has to separate from the pawn and white will take it. And the main issue for black is this king is cut off. And if we take with the rook, then rook d7, winning this pawn, and this is going to be a winning endgame. This was a great result for Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. And now with 3 games to go and 2 clutch games in the final 2 games, the score is, the gap is narrower as Wesley is now only 2 points ahead. So let's jump to our next game where once again Maxime was doing well, and again this could have been really the turning point had he won this game, because psychologically it's very difficult to start with a 3-point lead, to lose 2 games in a row and really narrow that gap. So let's start with this position. So rook c1 is played, so Maxime is black. Rook a4. Rook a2 is kind of a funny spot for the rook to be in. Bishop c3 and d2. Of course, impossible to take this pawn. And the bishop hangs at the very least. So rook d1 is played. And rook c8. And now we see this huge issue with the back rank. Playing rook b8, attacking this b3 pawn, a4. Bishop d2, and now we see the problem with this bishop here, and here Maxime decides to force a draw with rook e2 and giving a perpetual. And he is forced to do it because of this back rank mate. So this was a pretty heartbreaking result for him, as he had great winning chances in that position had he not taken the pawn. If we go back to that position and tried just taking on c3 and going a4 and just playing out this position. Attacking the pawn on e4, bringing his king, and just try to look for chances here. And let's jump to our penultimate round. So in this game with the white pieces, Maxime gave up a pawn early on and decided to go into this down the pawn opposite color bishop endgame, trying to drop, but that was a tall task considering there are 2 pairs of rooks on the board, and that of course favors the side that's trying to win. So c5 was played, bishop e4, and Wesley decides to give up his exchange, and we see that black just has way too many pawns for white to cope with. So let me show you the rest of this game and some funny moment that happened here. So there's not much to talk about. Black is simply pushing the pawns. White doesn't have any penetration squares with his rooks, and black is just simply winning. Black is just going to basically shove the pawns and win the game. So can't even create a passed pawn. So h5 actually just closed all the files, so no way for the rooks to get active. Keeps pushing. And here black has a great choice between pushing c2 or b2, and Wesley thought they're both winning, and he actually blundered with b2 as b2 runs into simply rook b2 because of the pin. And you can actually see on video he literally like face palms, and he was so visibly upset. You can actually check out the clip on our social media channels of St. Louis Chess Club. He was really shaken up by this, but being the brilliant player that he still finds this amazing strike of rook a1, forcing a trade of rooks. So rook c2, rook a1 is going to run into this, and it's time to say goodbye to this rook. So instead rook bc2 was played, trading these rooks, taking another pawn, and now we see the problem of putting the pawns on the same squares as the bishop. And c2, game is over. A really nice win by Wesley, so he actually clinched the title with this because the gap became 3 points. Because the gap was too big, and he already clinched the title, and the next game was actually just played for the bonus in the clutch money. And I will just show you the whole game because Maxime was clearly very jaded and wasn't in very good spirits to play this game, so this game ended very quickly. So d4 knight c6, e4 e5, queen f6, kind of coffee house chess, but again Maxime wasn't in the best of moods. So we go for this endgame. Castles. And huge blunder as d takes c6, b takes c6, rook d7, and resigns. 15 move game. I mean, at this point it didn't really matter for Maxime as he was already out, but it did matter for his opponent because with this victory, Wesley So actually won a $10,000 bonus as he won all the clutch money bonuses because the games that ended in a draw, they rolled over to these games, to games 11 and 12, which he won, so he won all the money. So congratulations to Wesley So on a fine result and qualifying to the semifinals. So let's move on to our match between Jeffery and Magnus. This match was a lot closer. On day one, Magnus won his first 3 games, but Jeffery did win game number 5, the clutch game, so he was only a point behind. And also by the rules, winning the clutch games gives you advantage in the tie breaks. If in case the match is tied, the player who has won more clutch games is going to win the match. So even though Jeffery was a point behind, he actually had the better tie breaks. So let's jump to move 33 in this position. After queen moved from the attack, Magnus blunders and takes rook ac5, and after take, he's simply going to lose a piece because there's no way to do anything about this situation with this knight, because queen g5 runs into f4. Now the queen can no longer support the knight. The knight cannot move because it's supporting the rook, and king f8 runs into bishop h4, and just impossible to defend everyone. So instead he goes c4, queen comes back, and now we see that actually the rook is trapped too. So the world champion resigned and the match was tied with Jeffery having the better tiebreak. So really amazing situation to be in, and this is not something we're used to seeing from Magnus. This game ended in a draw, and it was quite complicated. So a lot of things happened, both players had their chances. It's very difficult to really dive into it in detail in a highlight video, so I'm just going to show you a key moment. So in this position, Magnus goes knight e3, but instead he can try his chances with knight h4, king g5, e7, and something like this. And it's hard to say what's going on in this position. According to the engines, white is doing well, but I think it's quite complicated with 2 pieces and all these pawns for the 2 rooks. So, I think objectively it's hard to say that one of the sides is doing significantly better. But instead he went knight e3, and the game went on for a long time, and eventually after a lot of trades, after these pawns were traded, the game ended in a draw. So Magnus was actually quite unhappy with how the game was going. So if you're familiar with the player that Magnus is, he gets very frustrated when he doesn't win for a long time. And even though it was 2 games, he was still feeling, he admitted he was feeling frustrated, both that he wasn't winning and 2, that he wasn't playing well. And this is another thing about Magnus. When he's not playing well, even if he's scoring, he still doesn't feel very happy about it. And in our 3rd game, so this was actually the crucial game, and Jeffery Xiong himself admitted that this was the turning point in the match, because he said he simply did not recover from it psychologically, and everything went downhill for him. So in this position, again, looks like a draw, another king and rook endgame, but as I mentioned in these positions, these endgames really need to be played out because there's just so much room for error. So everything seems fine. And looks like we're really entering draw territory, and king d4, huge mistake by the young player. After check, this trade, c5, c3, and looks like the game should end in a draw if king e6, but g5, and now unfortunately for Jeffery, he is going to lose the game, and he resigned here in view of king goes back, and black is just going to come and take both of these pawns and just win the game, because the king will be in front of the pawn and the pawn will queen. So this was a really heartbreaking moment, and it was very actually easy to tell that from the next game the way it panned out, because Jeffery just lost so easily in a very one-sided game. Our very favorite h4 h5 was played, and this is something that's I think all players welcome, because we like seeing this brute force kind of attacks, just shoving your h-pawn down the board, opening the h-file and trying to checkmate your opponent. So queen d2, And I think here Jeffery maybe felt his position slowly might fall apart, so he started looking for some kind of initiative and trying to muddy the waters. So he goes e5, but unfortunately this position is just really rough for him because all his opponent's pieces are in the attack. This h file is going to open and the position is just not holdable at all. Bishop goes back, castles, takes, knight g5, and knight g5 comes with a really nice idea of going knight h7 with the threat of going knight f6 and rook h7 mate, as we will see. So the rook has to move, so check, another check, and rook h1, and this checkmate is actually unstoppable, and black has to part with a lot of material to cope with it, but of course we don't expect that from players of this level, so Jeffery resigned. So up next we have the 2 clutch games. So what Jeffery needed was to win one and to draw one, which is of course a tall task, but he did have the tiebreak advantage, so if he managed to do this, then he would win the match. So he had the white pieces in the opening, so this game was actually quite uneventful. I can quickly take you through the opening because the game itself lasted very long, but not a lot happened. So we see the Sveshnikov, a pet line of Magnus Carlsen, which he successfully used against Fabiano Caruana in their World Championship match. So we see this line. So the options are either bishop f6 taking or knight d5. So taking, gf, or knight d5 immediately. This is another option. So Wesley opts out for this line. And we see a lot of theory, so I cannot really comment on this because this is a long theoretical line. So we see all of this happen, and I think there was a novelty on around move 25, and I believe this g4 move that we're about to see was a novelty. And Magnus actually went down a pawn in a rook endgame and he drew quite comfortably. So up next is our final clutch game where a win is worth 3 points, a draw is 1.5, and Jeffery is in a must-win situation with the black pieces, and we know that Magnus is one of the best clutch players, winning this very important last round games and the tie breaks, and very good at this kind of high tense situation. So it was a very difficult situation for young Jeffery to be in. And unfortunately, he wasn't able to beat Magnus, as comes as no surprise, as Magnus is one of the greatest players in history. So Magnus plays a4, and Jeffery blunders with bishop c4. Of course, bishop has to go back, but this position is already very tough, as white has the extra pawn on the bishop pair. Instead, bishop c4 is played, hoping for some tactics. Rook d4 with a double attack. But now this great move of a5, and the idea is if the knight takes, bishop here, and the rook cannot really go anywhere to keep defending the knight because f3 and the rook cannot stay on the 4th rank. So instead rook c4 was played, and after a takes b6, Jeffery resigned in view of if rook c5, you check, and there is no way for the rook to stop this pawn from queening. A really nice finish by the world champion, who deservingly won the match and collected the bonus of $8,000 in clutch money, whereas Jeffery collected $2,000 for his clutch win in round 5. So tomorrow the matches between Levon Aronian and Alexander Grischuk, and between Fabiano Caruana and Lenier Dominguez will resume, and there will be 2 qualifiers and 2 of the players will go home. So make sure you're tuning in at 1 o'clock Central to check out the live commentary on US Chess Champs.